So we're sitting here today with Judy Carta, how long have you been with Juniper Gardens?
I began in fall of 1983, and I came as a postdoc. I was in the very first group of postdocs that Charlie got back then.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you learned about it and what Charlie's postdoc project was then?
Okay.
I don't think I'm familiar with that.
Let's see. So I learned about it because I was here at the University of Kansas. So I had been doing my PhD in the special ed department at KU. And I had known about Juniper Gardens somewhat in the past because I had spent some years at the University of Oregon, and so I had known about Charlie in Oregon, although we never knew each other there. I just knew about him. But anyway, so in connection with him, I had heard about Juniper Gardens and just had kind of a vague idea that it was a group of researchers doing work in the community in Kansas City. And as I was finishing my PhD, I was really looking for a place where I'd be able to do research that made a difference. Because I had come from a master's program that was very just almost basic developmental research. And then in the special ed department, the focus really wasn't primarily on research, but I was a researcher at heart, and so I really wanted to find a place where I could be with people doing work that made a difference. And so when I began the postdoc experience here, well, the postdoc was set up to provide new PhDs with opportunities to do research on issues related to minority populations. That was the focus on the postdoc then. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of different research projects going on at Juniper Gardens. In fact, there were two. Charlie was just beginning his work on class-wide peer tutoring, and he was doing the beginning of a longitudinal project looking at the long-term effects of class-wide peer tutoring. And Joe Del Quadri was doing some research on peer tutoring in reading, and that was about it. And so what we as postdocs had an opportunity to do was do classroom observations using the scissor, which was the kind of the father of all observation systems here at Juniper Gardens. And so we were observing in classrooms and then working with teachers to learn how to implement class-wide peer tutoring and work on fidelity of implementation of class-wide peer tutoring. And so a lot of the kind of the basic building blocks of my career started within that experience. But I think one thing that really stands out is as soon as I came to Juniper Gardens and started working on that project, I was so thrilled that I had found the right place. It was like, this finally is what I've been looking for.
What about it felt so right?
It was people who were really making a difference. And I was so kind of disenchanted with research that was just being done for research's sake that I thought, maybe that's what research is. And finding that there was a different way to do research and to engage with the community and be part of a group that was going to be learning something about the community and then feeding it back to make the community better was exactly what I was looking for.
That's great. Can you describe, sort of visually and in feel what the community was like at the time that you came?
Sure. So when I first started, we were located at the Juniper Gardens Community Center, which was the first office of Juniper Gardens. You'll hear people talk about the first, second, third, fourth offices of Juniper Gardens, but this was the first one. And so we were right in the thick of the housing project in that time. And so it was a rundown housing project, Juniper Gardens Children's Project, or housing project. And there were many boarded up homes, and you know, it was like not a safe place to come to work, truly. And you know, I remember making sure that I had a good car so that it wouldn't break down in the neighborhood, because it really did not feel very safe to come to work. And I know there were times when, you know, we'd be at the office until like about 5 in the winter time, and it's starting to get dark, and we'd start hearing some of the local neighborhood guys playing craps in our parking lot and making a lot of noise, and thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get out to my car in a safe way, but we did. And so it was tough. It was a tough neighborhood in those days, and let's see, what else could I say about that?
How has it changed over time?
Well, I see that the neighborhood, I mean, we've changed where we are, but also the neighborhood has changed too. And so when I leave here and go down Washington Boulevard, or you know, go west from here, I'm so encouraged to see many of the rundown neighborhoods looking so much better now, and a lot of refurbished homes and revitalization. I think the Juniper Gardens housing project is still somewhat run down, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be, and there have been resources that have gone into that area.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the transition from being a postdoc and into a scientist, and then how your research career began?
Sure. Well, while I was engaged in the postdoc, I wrote a grant to what was then the Bureau of Education for the Handicapped. So that was a precursor of kind of the part of IES that does research on special education. And so I wrote my first grant to develop an observation system that was like the scissor, which was an eco-behavioral observation system, but I wanted to apply it to preschool programs. And so I developed the eco-behavioral system for the complex assessment of preschool environment, the ESCAPE, which became the first acronym of many acronyms that I've developed over time. They call me the acronym diva, you know. So, and so that, being able to develop an observation system like that and to use it to go into preschool programs really gave me an opportunity to understand how preschool environments were shaping children's behavior, and how teacher interaction with children was shaping behavior, and the issues related to children developing delays because of their environments. Earlier today, we had a conversation about how different environments are, or were, maybe not, in inner city environments compared to suburban environments, and how there's often a lack of opportunity to respond or practice or learn in inner city classrooms. And so that was found using the scissor in elementary grade classrooms, but we found the same thing in preschool classrooms. And I was especially interested in classrooms that served kids with disabilities. So in those days, preschools for kids with disabilities were segregated. There were no children who were typically developing, well, very few. And so, what I was finding is the children with disabilities in inner city classrooms not only were kind of like doubly disadvantaged because they weren't given opportunities to learn because of their disability, but they also had fewer interactions with their teachers and less enriched environments because they were in inner city classrooms. And so that, being able to understand that, helped me learn about the kinds of interventions that would be needed for preschool kids. And so that began a whole line of research on developing interventions for preschool-aged kids. And so the primary focus of my intervention research was how do we develop interventions for preschool children that would prepare them for kindergarten. And one of the things that was happening in some classrooms, am I going too long?
No.
Okay.
No, this is interesting.
Okay. One of the things that was happening for early childhood special ed environments is that children were learning skills using behavioral techniques in these preschool classrooms, and they were learning skills so that they'd be able to function well in preschool settings that were fairly simple in terms of their design, but when they moved on into kindergarten environments, and if they wanted to get into kindergarten environments that were regular ed settings and not special ed settings, those environments were much more complex. The groups were larger. They had fewer kind of supports to help them engage in the kinds of behaviors that they already learned in preschool. And so what was necessary was interventions that would help kind of bridge that gap, that would help kids learn the skills that they would need in kindergarten and first grade. So one of the things that I did was I did an analysis and an observation of what actually went on in kindergarten classrooms and figure out what kinds of behaviors children would need to know, what were their settings like, and learn about those environments, and then help the preschool teachers learn how to kind of simulate that in preschool settings, so to make that transition easier. And so what got developed over time was a curriculum called Skills for Learning Independence in Diverse Environments, Project SLIDE. And so what we were able to do is teach children the skills that they needed in preschool to be successful in kindergarten. And that became really a successful intervention, and we followed children over time that were able to get that experience and found out that they were much more successful when they got to kindergarten and first grade. So it was a nice transition intervention.
What were some of the challenges you faced early in your career?
One of the things that that maybe was happening around the time that we were developing that intervention was, so this was, at this point, it would have been like 1990, 1991, and some of the teachers that we were working with started to tell us about that they were having children in their classrooms that were different than other children that they'd ever had before, that they were way out of control, that that children had real difficulty with attention, and they were super aggressive, and they weren't sure what was going on, but they had an idea that it might have to do with the fact that this was the beginning of the crack epidemic in our community. And they asked us, you know, like they were saying, well, what kinds of interventions can you help us with? And we were, it really made us think about that, because there was no literature to go to. There were no interventions available for children who might be like prenatally exposed to drugs. At that time, we knew something about children who were prenatally exposed to alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome, but even then, there wasn't very much information about interventions that could make a difference. And so, what we decided to do is, while we kind of were helping teachers using the kinds of interventions that we would typically use with any child with kind of behavior issues, we wanted to kind of understand more about how prenatal exposure might be affecting kids. So we were able to get actually a big amount of funding to establish the Early Childhood Research Institute on Substance Abuse. And so we got together with some other researchers around the country, Scott McConnell at the University of Minnesota and Mary McAvoy at the University of Minnesota, and also some researchers from the University of South Dakota, so that we'd be able to look not only at illicit drugs, but we were interested in looking at alcohol and the effects of alcohol on children over time. And so getting engaged in South Dakota gave us access to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and some of the other Indian reservations too, where we knew that the incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome was really high. But we wanted to be able to learn how children developed over time. And we also wanted to be able to look at how children's home environments might be affecting their development. Because we had a hunch that it wasn't just their prenatal exposure that was affecting children's development and their behavior over time, but the kinds of interactions that they were experiencing in their homes when a parent might still be using drugs or alcohol. And so what we developed, and it still kind of amazes me that we really kind of had the courage to do this study, was we did a longitudinal studies with 3 cohorts of children, one starting at birth, one starting at age 3, and one starting at age 5, and followed all 3 groups up for, I think it was 3 years, so that we could get kind of a longitudinal track on children's language development, social development, behavior development, and look at, and not only look at children's behavior, but also look at their interactions with their parents in their homes and in classrooms if they were in early childhood settings. So it was an incredibly rich set of data. And we looked, and we also looked at children who were not exposed, but in those same environments, those same kind of low-income environments, because we wanted to be able to separate out the effects of prenatal exposure and environment, if that makes sense. The reason this was pretty courageous is nobody was doing in-home observations in those days. And so that gave us a whole new set of issues to deal with, going into potentially violent and unsafe environments. So we had to learn all about how to help our observers and assessors who are going into homes be safe. So, we did things like not look like we were carrying expensive test materials into homes. We disguised our materials in diaper bags, so we would blend into the environment. if we were working in a particular neighborhood, we would become kind of friends with the community, you know, and find someone in the community who would help us out and be kind of a liaison to the community. And so there were just, you know, you ask about what kinds of challenges, so that was a big challenge. And it was also a big challenge to learn about how children were growing up in those environments. And it was really, it was hard, you know, to learn about that and to realize that, you know, even though I came from a pretty low-income environment myself, to just hear about the kinds of things that children were exposed to, you know, the domestic violence, the neighborhood violence, and just the stresses that parents had to deal with. So we learned so much about kind of all the risks that kids had to deal with and that families had to deal with as well.
I don't know about that project. That's really interesting.
Can you take us through what you perceive are the pivotal moments in Juniper's history?
Pivotal moments in Juniper's history. Well, I think when we started doing research on early childhood, that was a pivotal moment. You know, before, you know, when I first arrived at Juniper Gardens, it was a place that did school-aged research. That was it. And so, you know, when you think about Juniper Gardens now, it's pretty early childhood focused. And so that, I think that was pivotal. I think another pivotal moment was, and I can only kind of describe it from my perspective, but getting involved with Project Eagle, I think, was another pivotal moment, because they were such a close community partner. And before that, our partners were with schools, and but the project that we began with Project Eagle was really such a tight partnership. We began work with Project Eagle when Project Eagle first began and it was just a home visiting program at the time. And
when was it?
This was probably about 1991. Even before that, okay. So it's been a number of different types of federal programs. So it was once part of a program called the Comprehensive Child Development Programs. And this was a network of early childhood programs, home visiting programs around the country that provided support to families. So those programs tried to develop kind of wraparound services to families to support their child. So they did that for about 5 years, and at that point, we weren't a partner with them too much. I was kind of a technical advisor to that program, but when they began as part of the Early Head Start program, that really solidified our relationship as a partner, because part of Early Head Start, when it began rolling out in our country, it set up a national evaluation so that the first 17 programs, Early Head Start programs, had to get a research partner. And it was the first model that I'm aware of in early childhood programs or even in school-based programs that had a model like that, where they had to have a research partner. And so in all 17 sites, there was a large research evaluation going on of that site, but it also was the national evaluation of Early Head Start. So all 17 sites contributed data to this national evaluation. And so that was a pivotal moment, because we were involved in doing research not only on the program, but with the program. So it was our job to help programs become better with the data that we got. So it was kind of a continuous improvement kind of relationship.
Interesting. That continues.
Yeah.
Can you describe for us, and I know that this is a big question, but how Juniper has affected you personally and professionally?
Well, I think personally, well, maybe the obvious is, before I came here, well, when I first began the program, one of the first weeks I was here at Juniper Gardens, you know, I met Charlie. He was the director of the postdoc grant, and I walked into his office and I said, "Charlie, I want to learn everything you know." and then that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It's been pretty incredible to be able to kind of share a career with one's life partner.
Oh, that's really special.
You know, people ask me, how can you do it? You know, how can you be married to somebody and work with them? And I can't imagine doing anything different. You know, and I think it's because our work is our life. So that's kind of how it affects me personally. You know, I think one big part of that, and you know, something that I've learned a lot from Charlie, is the value of mentorship, and that I think as I get more advanced in my career, I understand how important mentorship is. You know, and I think if we don't have good mentors, it's really hard to really get the passion for the work and really understand how we can make a difference. And so as I move on in my career, being a mentor to others has become a real focus.
And then, you know, we've kind of been talking about this the entire time, but sort of broadly and specific to Juniper Gardens, how has this impacted your professional life? I mean, it's kind of in some way it has been your professional life.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to answer that. I think that over time, the importance of the early years in life has become just more and more a focus for me in my career, you know, when I think about the neighborhood that I grew up in, or the neighborhood around here, and the kids that grow up in these kinds of circumstances, I think about you know, how society often blames the child, and you know, sometimes tries to help kids as they get older, but it's what happens in the earliest years that plays such a important role in who they become. And so that's why, as my career has unfolded, I think I focused earlier and earlier and earlier, you know, so that now what happens in the earliest months of life, and helping parents and caregivers understand that they can't lose out on that important opportunity to make a difference in the lives of their babies.
What would you say are some of your fondest memories of your time at Juniper?
I think whenever we're able to get together and enjoy each other, you know, we've had just great parties. I think the parties that I enjoy the most are the Halloween parties, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of get outside of ourselves, and so that's always been great to see how creative people can be, and make each other laugh.
Mm-hmm. And then, do you have any fun or interesting stories that you'd like to tell us about? Maybe, do you have any good fan stories, or any fun stories about Joe Del Quadri, or Barb, or Alva, or...
The one that comes to mind right now, it's when I was a very, let's delete that one. One when the first cohort of postdocs that I was involved with, there were a couple of crazy guys, and I remember they were writing a grant. There were two guys, Don Dorsey and Chris Nelson, and they were writing a grant. And in those days, you know, you couldn't go home and write a grant on your laptop. You had to use the computer here at work. And so, you know, we were in the first office, the office that I explained to you was right in the housing project. So they're there staying overnight to write their grant. So you know, we said, okay, we're gonna let you stay here and write your grant, and so that, you know, we locked the door behind us, and the next morning we came to the office, and we saw them both slumped over there, which was this early precursor of a computer. They were just slumped over, dead asleep, and there they were, you know.
In some ways, I wonder if being able to take your work home is better.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about sleeping at the office, but...
Yeah, right.
What would you tell the next generation of investigators and researchers at Juniper Gardens about Juniper?
About Juniper?
Mm-hmm.
Juniper. That I think the key to making it successful is listening to the community, and taking cues from the community about what's important. I think making sure that the work we do is meaningful not only to the contributions we can make to the professional literature, but is making a difference in the community itself is really important. And we're only going to be doing really good work if we understand what the issues are that face the children and the families in the community. So that's where I think our focus needs to be. And I think we need to keep working on our engagement with the community. That's really important.
Mm-hmm. And then, is there any type of work that you would like to see future researchers focus on or continue to work on?
Well, you know, for me, the work that I'm doing right now is always the most important. Mm-hmm. And so the work that I have become so excited about is the work we're starting to do, bringing in multiple sectors within the community around a specific problem or issue. So now we're working on bridging the word gap intervention. And think we know that if we're gonna make a difference on the word gap and on improving children's early learning environments, we can't be effective only working in one sector of the community. So we're working on ways to find out what each sector might be able to do and build a guide for helping communities engage together across sectors on an issue like that. And I think that that's just fascinating to me. And the fact that we are starting to get communities that are asking for that is really just so exciting to me. So just an example, we were recently contacted by Shreveport, Louisiana, and they sent me an email saying, we know that a third of our kids enter kindergarten significantly below the mean in their language and early literacy, and even though we've been trying to work on this for a long time, you know, we're not successful. How can you help us? And this is a group of people who represent multiple sectors in Shreveport. So it's the business community, and it's the libraries, and it's the schools, and it's the faith-based communities. And the fact that they're already thinking about this as multiple sectors just really makes me really excited. And so I'd love to be able to see us do more work like this.
Yeah, that's great.
Are there any questions we didn't ask? There are things that you'd like to tell us that we didn't touch on?
I can't think of anything.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface. Sounds like that story you told about going into families' homes
Mm-hmm.
And studying fetal alcohol syndrome and stuff. It's like I'm not familiar with that line of work, and so I feel like there's just more there. So I think we're gonna do this again, Judy.
Yeah, there were a ton of stories that came from that. I wish I could remember. I mean, the things that we learned, I remember once an observer came back and she went into a home in South Dakota, and they were having like a wake for somebody in the home. You know, like there's a dead body in a coffin, like.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure that, you know, probably most of the time there were routine visits or whatever, but I'm sure there were lots of really intense experiences for
Really
people
intense, yeah. I mean, we would have to kind of build in opportunities for our research team to like debrief,
Right.
you know, after visits, because it was taking a toll on folks.
Yeah, I
really.
can imagine.
And we had never, you know, going into classrooms was nothing like that, so it was just like a whole different frame of, you know, thinking about doing research.
Was it common practice to do home visits like that?
No.
Mhm.
I mean, there were not, you know, even people just doing like there weren't home visiting programs then, so doing research in homes was pretty innovative.
Was that going on at the same time that Hart and Risley were doing their work, or was it?
Let's see.
'Cause they were.
Hart and Risley would have been a little bit before that, but they didn't go into.
Was that all classroom based?
No, Hart and Risley?
Mhm.
No, that was in homes, but they didn't go into like really
Problem homes, yeah.
homes, yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Do you think that research input, because that seems to be relatively common practice now in social work for workers to go into people's homes, do you think that research had an impact on?
Yeah, I think so. You know, and we thought a lot about, you know, do we really want to go into homes and put our observers and assessors at risk? And we thought, well, we're never gonna be able to learn about families like this and the stresses that they undergo unless we do this.
And the kids are living in those
Right,
environments.
right, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And we'd have to do things like get affidavits to protect our data from subpoena, so that, you know, some DA might want to be able to prosecute a family, or, you know, so we'd have to, so it's like a whole set of issues that we had to deal with.
Yeah, it seems like that's one of the things that's unique about Juniper, and that we have investigators and staff who are, you know, they're willing to push the boundaries, and they're
Mhm.
willing to go
Right.
into new places and try new
Right.
methods, and
Yeah.
all for the sake of doing something good for schools and for families and
Mhm.
communities, and I think it's yeah.
That's very cool. Well, thank you, Judy.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
That was really interesting. And